This is not a story about London being rich, and it's not a story about the rest of Britain being poor. It's a story about a system built to pull money into one place and drain it from everywhere else. A system that didn't fail. It worked, exactly as designed. London is one of the wealthiest cities on Earth. By recent counts, it's home to roughly 215,000 millionaires, more than 500 centimillionaires, and around 45 billionaires. Its GDP per person rivals places like Singapore or Luxembourg. Measured on its own, London's economy would rank roughly among the top 15 countries globally. But step outside the M25, and Britain tells a different story. In large parts of the country, incomes sit below the European Union average. Life expectancy in former industrial areas can look closer to parts of Eastern Europe than Western Europe. Regions that once powered the global economy now struggle to generate even basic growth. And the gap isn't closing, it's accelerating. In 2023, London's GDP per person was about £56,000. The Northeast was about 24,000, more than double. This is not a failure of policy. This is policy doing what it was built to do. So the question is simple. What decisions created a country that works like this? At first glance, this looks like modernization. Britain moved from old industry to new services, from manufacturing to finance, from the past to the future. London became a global hub, pulling in talent, capital, and opportunity. And the narrative writes itself. Some places adapted, others didn't. The regions that embraced change thrived. The regions that clung to coal and steel were left behind. It sounds logical, it sounds inevitable, but it's incomplete. Because what looks like natural economic evolution was actually a chain of deliberate choices. Choices that reshaped Britain from the inside out. Then you hit the moment that breaks the story. In 1976, Britain, former empire, birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, a victor of World War II, was forced to ask the International Monetary Fund for a bailout. At the time, most people assumed it was temporary, a crisis to manage, a one-off humiliation. But what followed wasn't a return to the old model. It was a restructuring that effectively abandoned large parts of the country. By the late 70s, Britain faced a choice. Rebuild the industrial base, modernize manufacturing, invest in productivity, technology, and regional infrastructure, or take a different path. Crush inflation with high interest rates, cut spending, remove subsidies, and let the market decide what survives. Britain chose the second path. Not because the first was impossible, but because the political class concluded the post-war model was finished. And when Margaret Thatcher arrived in 1979, that conclusion became a program. This wasn't a gradual shift, it was a controlled demolition. After the war, Britain ran on a bargain. Nationalized industries provided stable work across the country. Coal in Wales, steel in Sheffield, shipbuilding in Glasgow, car plants in Coventry. The jobs weren't always efficient, but they anchored communities and spread wages. By the 1970s, the model was breaking. Germany rebuilt with modern manufacturing. Japan pushed automation and productivity. Britain, by contrast, leaned on aging factories and protected industries that couldn't compete. The result was the worst mix possible. Low growth, high inflation, industrial decline. Thatcher's strategy was brutally clear. Use monetary policy to crush inflation, cut spending to shrink the deficit, privatize state industries, and break trade union power. And in narrow terms, it worked. Inflation fell. The deficit improved. The numbers stabilized. But manufacturing collapsed. Unemployment surged into the millions. Whole towns lost their main employer in a single economic season. At the same time, London was being rewired. In 1986, Big Bang deregulation opened the city to global finance. Foreign banks flooded in. Capital markets exploded. High-paying jobs in finance, law, consulting, and property concentrated in the capital. Britain didn't just become a service economy, it became a service economy with one dominant engine. Once the system shifted, it started reinforcing itself. Finance-led growth looks impressive in national statistics. GDP rises, tax receipts rise, wealth piles up. But it spreads differently than industrial growth. A factory doesn't just hire assembly workers. It supports logistics, parts makers, machine tools, engineers, and small businesses across a region. A hedge fund in Mayfair doesn't do that. It creates extremely high incomes for a small group, then pushes up property prices and concentrates services around that cluster. Socially, the consequences were brutal. Communities built around coal, steel, and shipyards didn't transition. They collapsed fast. Unemployment didn't just rise, it became generational. You ended up with towns where work stopped being normal. And when work stops being normal, everything else unravels. Then investment follows wealth rather than need. Infrastructure concentrates where returns are already highest. The feedback loop is simple. London attracts investment. Investment creates jobs. Jobs attract talent. Talent attracts more investment. Other regions didn't simply fall behind. They were structurally locked out. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, the system crossed a threshold. Housing stopped being a place to live and started behaving like a financial asset. Right to buy sold off public housing without replacing it at scale. And global capital poured into London property from anyone looking for a safe store of value. Prices didn't just rise, they detached from wages. Around 2000, the average London home cost about 4 times the average salary. By 2023, it was closer to 13 times. That changes a country. Home ownership becomes inheritance, not effort. A whole generation gets priced out, unless they already have wealth behind them. Outside London, the trap looks different. Local jobs don't return. People can't stay because opportunity is gone, but they can't leave because moving to London requires deposits and rents they can't afford. You can't afford to stay. You can't afford to leave. At that point, incremental tools stop working. You can't just invest in the north when growth mechanisms, networks, capital, institutions are concentrated in the south. And the political system follows the same geography. Parliament is in London, the Treasury is in London, major media is in London, so policy keeps optimizing for the place that's already winning. This doesn't self-correct. It either gets restructured or it fractures further. Here's what makes this uncomfortable. Britain didn't become unequal by accident. It became unequal by design. The restructuring of the 1980s happened with full awareness that entire regions would be written off. Sometimes it was said outright. A Thatcher-era minister, Norman Tebbit, famously suggested the unemployed should get on their bikes to find work. The message was clear. The state won't save your region. Move or sink. Some argue this was necessary. That global competition made industrial decline inevitable. But that's not the whole truth. Germany faced similar pressures and chose a different balance. It defended a manufacturing base, invested in vocational training, and built multiple strong regional hubs. It didn't bet everything on one city. Others say people should have adapted, retrained, moved, switched careers. But you can't retrain an entire town overnight. You can't relocate a generation when housing is a trap. And you can't build opportunity in a place that has been systematically disinvested from. Then 2008 hits, and the system gets exposed. Productivity stalls, growth slows, and instead of rebuilding, Britain pivots into austerity, cutting public investment when it's most needed. London recovers faster. Much of the rest doesn't. Brexit adds another layer of friction, uncertainty, trade complexity, labor shortages, and the divide widens again. Final irony, outside London, incomes are lower and services are weaker. In London, the cost of living is crushing and housing is out of reach. Nobody wins except the very top. Here's the catastrophic part. It's not that Britain is poor, and it's not even that Britain is unequal. It's that millions of people have been trained to believe this is normal, that regional decline is natural, that London dominance is inevitable. It's not. This is the result of specific decisions made by specific people at specific moments. And those decisions can be reversed, but only if the country admits what was done. Because once that belief breaks, once people see the system is built, not natural, everything else becomes negotiable. Britain isn't a poor country, it's a misaligned one. It built an economy that rewards concentration over cohesion, capital over communities. And until that changes, the country doesn't heal. It keeps fracturing. The system was the story.